Hey everyone, my name is Matt. Welcome to my shop. Today is April 3rd and this is my weekly shop update. So I hope you all had a great Easter. I did. My family was in town. My dad and I spent some time together. We spent some time out here in the shop. We retooled or rehandled one of my grandfather's old tools. The handle had broken that my dad was using, and we put a new handle on that. So my dad got to try out the draw knife and the spoke shave. He is a fan of the spoke shave. Definitely seemed to enjoy that. So we did that, and then we also started putting the drive shaft back onto the sawmill. I had removed that last summer when I painted the mill. I hadn't put it back on yet. I still have a lot of things to put back on the mill, but we were out there trying to get these bolts in, and it was a cold day. I think it wasn't even that cold. It was like upper 20s, maybe 30 degrees out, but it felt so cold, and all we were thinking was like, how did I do so much work out there in 2016 when I was building the mill, and it was a lot colder than that? I have no idea. I might have just gotten really cold tolerant. I don't know. Anyway, I made a lot of progress this week on the waterfall tables, the river waterfall tables. The first one's over here. So this is where this table is at. This one is ready for the glass inlay into the top. I need to make a template for that and then send it out to the glass cutter to get that cut, and then I can inlay that and this one will be done. But a lot of progress on this one this week, because last week this was just a slab that I had just recently surfaced. So I started by cutting the waterfall joint on the slab. I did this one with the track saw because I showed on the last one how to do it with a circular saw and an edge guide. So this time I thought I'd take the easy way and show how much easier it is to do with a track saw. That made for a very straight and clean cut. Didn't really have to clean up the cut at all. It was already pretty straight and accurate, but I did hit it with a hand plane just to clean it up, more of a force of habit, and just because I like planing these things, it just makes a really fun sound. And also because I showed how to do loose tenons with the router on the last one. On this one, I cut the loose tenons with the domino, made that process just a little bit faster, but the same exact concept. And then for the glue up on this, same kind of thing as last time. I used some plywood cawls, glued those directly to the slab, which allowed me to pull the joint nice and tight, close it up all the way around, and have no problems with any kind of gaps or anything along that seam. So that seam turned out absolutely flawless. So that took care of the woodworking side of things, this little L shape here. And the next thing I started working on is the base for this end. This is a steel base, a trapezoidal shape, just like the wood base I did on the last table. So I got to use my new bandsaw to make all the miter cuts for this base. I also made the cuts on the stock for another base for the next table, since that's going to have the same design, just probably a different finish. So since that was steel, that also meant that I got to do a little bit of welding. Haven't done that since last summer. Definitely missed that. So I set up a little bit of a welding spot outside on the bandsaw mill's bed, which is a nice flat area to work, and got that frame welded up pretty quickly. Now for a finish on this, I wanted to try something a little different. So I saw a video on Jordan Smith's YouTube channel. I'll leave a link to that in the cards, where he did a boiled linseed oil finish on steel, which I thought was a really cool look, and this a lot different than something that I've seen before. So the process for that finish is to apply boiled linseed oil directly to a hot piece of steel, and that causes the linseed oil to kind of darken and enrichen. And I think I wasn't able to get the base actually hot enough. I put it in the oven in the kitchen at 525 degrees, and it sat in there for about an hour. I don't have a thermometer to actually measure it to see how hot it was, but it seemed like it was pretty hot. So I went ahead and used it at that temperature, and that didn't actually blacken quite the way that I expected it to. But I'm actually really happy that I didn't, because I have a much more bronze look, which I think is just a little bit nicer, a little more unique. And having a little more of that brown hue in there, I think it's going to look really good against the brown hue of the elm. So I think it's going to play in really nicely. So pretty happy with the way that turned out. Never done anything like that before, and I got to do a little steel work, which is pretty cool. So that's where this table is at. How about the resin river table? So not a whole lot of progress on the table itself, but I did take some time to work through some samples to figure out what kind of pigment that I want to go with, or how much pigment I would like, or what the look was going to look like, because I had really no idea, and also to figure out the working properties of the epoxy. So I had two pigments that I was working with. This is a true blue and this is a turquoise, and I was kind of messing with look of just the true blue, how much true blue by itself, and then if I want to mix some turquoise in, how much of that, etc. So this first one here is with 1 scoop of the true blue and no turquoise. And the scoop thing is kind of arbitrary, I guess. My scoops were how much I could fit onto a 1/4-inch chisel, and that's going to be mixed with 6 ounces of epoxy. So I kept that ratio as I was working through all my samples. So this received 1x of the true blue, and that was it. So these two here, these are both one part or 1 scoop of each. This is with the West System epoxy, and this is with the eco-epoxy liquid plastic. I wanted to get an idea of how the pigments would react given the different cure times. So one thing I noticed with this first sample is because the eco-epoxy has such a long curing time or setting time, it gives the pigment a lot of time to kind of disperse and kind of dissolve out into the whole resin, as opposed to staying kind of clumped and patterned like you can see in these ones. So the West System set like really quickly because this is too thick of a pour for West System. It got really hot. I'm surprised it didn't actually fail. I did throw it outside to hopefully get some of the heat out of there, but this got extremely hot. The center area here where there was no wood touching cured like within 30 minutes to like a rock, and it was surrounded by a little bit of like liquid epoxy around the outside. So I don't know how strong this would be in practice, but as a sample, it worked out pretty well. So you can see how much crazier the colors and the resin are on the West System because it actually set up really quickly. The eco-epoxy had time for that pigment to kind of spread out and do its thing. And then this one down here just happens to be 3 times of the true blue, which is still kind of, I don't know, kind of pale and a little bit more on the boring side, I guess. So the other thing I wanted to mess around with on the eco-epoxy was the mixing ratios. So at 1:1, a lot of people say it's a really soft cured product, and soft is a probably not strong enough word. It's like rubber. So this first one here, the bottom area here is that eco-epoxy, and I ended up capping this with some West System just so I could sand it and flush it up and get it cleaned up. But I was able to bend this piece pretty much in half. It had that much flex in it, and on the bottom side here it's still very soft. So if I push my fingernail into it, it just goes straight in, but it does come back. So kind of an interesting effect, I guess. So the solution with the eco-epoxy is to mix it with a different ratio than what it states on the container. And a lot of people say to mix it 2:1, so 2 part resin to 1 part hardener. So that's actually what I did here. And that cured much harder as opposed to this. Now it is pretty much as hard as the West System. The West System might be just a little bit harder, but for all intents and purposes, this is way harder than the wood around it anyway. And also cured a little bit faster, maybe like 2 days. It was fairly hard, as opposed to this taking like almost 4 days to cure. And on this one down here, I did with like, well, 1.5 to 1, somewhere around there. Not quite as much resin to hardener, and this is actually pretty close to the same consistency as that. So I think overall, if you just mix this stuff with less hardener, it's going to cure a lot harder, which is kind of an interesting thing in itself. And they're also selling these things in 2:1 kits now, as opposed to the 1:1 kit that I bought. So when I do my mix, I'll have some like half a jug of hardener that I won't need for anything, but that's all right. Just for comparison's sake, this is what happens if you mix it at 1:2, so 2 parts hardener to 1 part resin. You get something even more flexible than that first sample I did. And I also have this other sample here. This is some walnut with a blue pigment, and then I actually put brass shavings on the bottom. So it has kind of a cool look. I think it's going to turn out looking kind of neat. At this point, I'm just experimenting because I have so much of this stuff, and it's just kind of fun. So I think that's all that's going on in my shop this week. Let's take a look at some viewer projects. First this week is a live edge end table by Ronald. Ronald made this end table for a charity auction to fund a local food pantry. It's made from ambrosia maple from a tree that he cut in his backyard 3 years ago and slabbed up with his chainsaw mill. Next is a coffee table by Brian. Brian made this walnut coffee table as a present for his son. The steel legs are a custom order from Symmetry Hardware in Oregon. The cracks and bark are stabilized with epoxy, and there's also a few maple bow ties. Next, the Bassinet by Petr. The Bassinet is built from ash, features an Osmo finish, and it has knockdown hardware for easy disassembly. Lastly this week is a changing table by Phil. Phil built this changing table for his daughter, and she arrived right after he finished building it. The changing table is made from walnut and ash, and this was his first time doing any dovetails, and he says he loved the process. So for all my friends down in Houston, you do have the Texas Woodworking Show coming up, I think in like a week and a half. It's the weekend of the 13th, so I'll leave some links down there in case you weren't aware of that. Should be fun. And speaking of shows, it's going to be pretty busy here. I got Fine Woodworking Live is coming up. I'll be there for that, checking that out, and then I'll be at Makers Central in the first weekend of May. So that's going to be fun as well. So hopefully I see a lot of you within the next month or so. Should be, always is a fun time. Not should be, it will be. So I think that's about all I have for this week. Thank you as always for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments about anything I talked about today or anything here in my shop, please feel free to leave me a comment. As always, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, happy woodworking.